£44,000. That is what Diddley Squat Farm Shop was worth when it opened. A converted agricultural shed, a handful of produce, a car park that could generously be described as optimistic. Everyone found it charming, because it wasn't a farm shop. It was the first visible component of a vertically integrated agricultural enterprise that would eventually be valued at over £100 million. And the brewing industry, worth billions, controlled by multinationals, staffed by people who do this professionally, never saw it coming. Here's what nobody in that industry understood at the time. The farm was not the point. The farm was the factory floor, and the beer brewed from its barley was not a side project. It was the engine that would drive the entire operation forward. By the time Carlsberg noticed, it was already too late to buy their way in at a sensible price. This is the story of how Hawkstone quietly became the financial backbone of Clarkson's farm, not the most visible part. Not the part Amazon pays for. The part that actually compounds. Jeremy Clarkson, the son of a Paddington Bear toy salesman from Doncaster, bought Diddley Squat Farm in 2008 for £6 million. He knew almost nothing about farming. He said so repeatedly on camera for money. That candor, that willingness to be publicly incompetent, would turn out to be worth considerably more than the farm itself. The farm's first year of profit was £144. Not a misprint. £144 on 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire agricultural land. Any conventional business analyst looking at those numbers would have written a very short report. They would have been looking at entirely the wrong numbers. What Clarkson had understood, perhaps instinctively rather than strategically, was that the farm's value was not in its yield, it was in its story. And a story, unlike a crop, does not depend on the weather. Hawkstone Lager launched in 2021. The timing was not accidental. By that point, Clarkson's farm on Amazon Prime had already established something that no marketing budget could replicate. A genuine audience that trusted the provenance. People had watched the barley grow. They had watched Clarkson make a mess of harvesting it. They had watched Caleb Cooper, the farm's manager, who was already working at Diddley Squat when Clarkson bought it, explain with barely concealed exasperation exactly what was going wrong and why. That accumulated emotional investment was worth more than any advertising spend. Caleb Cooper is worth pausing on. He was not cast. He was not discovered. He was not recruited as a character. He was a farm manager doing his job on a farm that happened to have cameras. That distinction is everything. You cannot manufacture authenticity. You can only find it and then point a camera at it. When Hawkstone beer arrived in that context, grown here, brewed from this specific barley, by these people you already know, the brewing industry's conventional wisdom about brand building became instantly obsolete. You cannot build in a boardroom what Hawkstone had built through 3 series of television. You can only watch it happen and calculate how much it would cost to buy. Now, here is the part that even people who follow this story closely have never fully joined up. The farm does not need to be profitable. The farm needs to be visible. And because the farm is visible, because Amazon pays an estimated £10 to £12 million annually to film it, every product that emerges from it carries the visibility as a built-in asset. Hawkstone didn't need a marketing department. It had a television series. The question was never whether the beer would sell. The question was whether the operation around it could scale fast enough to absorb the demand. The answer came in the numbers. Hawkstone generated £7.8 million in revenue in 2024. 12 months later, that figure had reached £21.3 million, 134% growth in a single year, in a sector where established brands fight over fractions of a percentage point of market share. The brewing industry, which had been watching with polite skepticism, suddenly found itself doing a different kind of calculation. Carlsberg was watching too. The £50 million offer came in and went out. Clarkson rejected it. The brewing industry expected him to come back with a counter. He didn't, and what happened next is the most counterintuitive moment in this entire story. The rejection was worth more than the offer. The moment Clarkson said no to £50 million, Hawkstone stopped being a celebrity beer brand and became something else entirely. It became a brand that had been valued at £50 million and found that valuation inadequate. In consumer psychology, that is not a story about stubbornness. That is a story about belief. People do not queue for things they believe are overpriced. They queue for things they believe are undervalued. Carlsberg, in trying to acquire Hawkstone, had instead provided it with the most powerful marketing message it could possibly carry. We were offered $50 million and we said no. The Hawkstone brewery is now valued at £75 million. Carlsberg's offer, rejected 12 months prior, is now £25 million below the current valuation. The company that was trying to buy its way into provenance has instead funded a revaluation of the thing it wanted to own. That is not a failed acquisition. It is an accidental investment in a competitor. This is where the story stops being about beer. The Farmer's Dog Pub, purchased and renovated for £1 million, now employs 146 people and has 360 spaces in its car park. That car park is not incidental. 360 spaces is not a rural pub. 360 spaces is a destination. And destinations, unlike pubs, do not compete with every other pub in the county. They compete with Bicester Village. They compete with a day out. They compete with an experience. The Farmer's Dog is not a pub with good beer. It is a physical extension of the Hawkstone brand, the place. You come after you've watched 3 series of television and you want to be in the story rather than observing it. The farm shop started that. The pub completes it. Consider what this means for the loop. Barley grows at Diddley Squat. Amazon films it happening. Hawkstone brews beer from it. 2,000 pubs stock that beer. 53 people work at the brewery. 146 people work at the pub. Each element of this structure makes the others more valuable. The television series gives the beer provenance. The beer gives the pub identity. The pub gives the farm a physical destination. The farm gives the television series its next series of content. None of these things works as well without the others. All of them together form something that has no established valuation methodology, because nothing quite like it has existed before. It is not a business. It is a flywheel. And here is what the competitors, the Carlsbergs, the Tesco buyers, the brand strategists who looked at this and tried to categorize it, consistently missed. You cannot replicate a flywheel by buying one component. You cannot purchase provenance. You cannot acquire authenticity. You cannot license the feeling of watching someone fail at farming for 3 years before understanding what they were actually building. Carlsberg offered £50 million for the part of the machine that happens to produce liquid. They were looking at the output. The value was always in the loop. The farm is not an asset. It is the origin story. And origin stories, once told convincingly enough, cannot be untold. There are genuine risks here. Hawkstone's valuation at £75 million rests substantially on the continuation of Amazon's involvement. The 10 to 12 million annual payment that funds the operation and provides the visibility is a contract, not a permanent endowment. If Amazon's priorities shift, and streaming priorities do shift, the visibility that underpins the brand's premium positioning shifts with it. The brewery employs 53 people. The pub employs 146. The farm employs more. That is not a vanity project. That is a payroll. And a payroll built on the continued interest of a single streaming platform is a concentration of risk that any conventional analyst would flag. Clarkson is also not an institution. He is a person. Hawkstone's brand equity is inseparable from his continued public presence and his continued association with the farm. That is both the business's greatest strength and its most significant structural vulnerability. The vertically integrated agricultural enterprise model works precisely because of who stands at the center of it. Remove that person and you do not have a £75 million brewery. You have a mid-sized lager brand with 2,000 pub accounts and a complicated origin story that requires a lot of explanation. These are real risks. They are worth naming honestly. Stand back. Look at the full picture. Clarkson bought 1,000 acres of Oxfordshire. Farmland for £6 million in 2008. The farm's first year returned £144. The farm shop opened with £44,000 of assets and reached £1.3 million in a single year. Hawkstone launched in 2021, grew from £7.8 million to £21.3 million in 12 months, rejected a £50 million acquisition offer, and is now valued at $75 million. The pub cost $1 million and employs 146 people. Amazon pays an estimated $10 to $12 million annually to film all of it. The total farm valuation now stands at £45 million. The beer alone is valued at more than the farm it came from. Every number in that sequence connects to every other number. The farm makes the beer credible. The beer makes the pub viable. The pub makes the farm more famous. The fame makes Amazon's contract worth renewing. The contract pays for the farm to keep doing all of it. That is what Carlsberg offered £50 million to acquire a piece of. One component, one output, one product category in a supply chain that only works as a whole. They were looking at the beer. The beer was never the point. The point was that a man from Doncaster, who bought a farm he couldn't run, hired a manager he couldn't fire, failed publicly enough to earn a television series, and then, through a combination of calculation and instinct that even he might struggle to fully separate, built something that the most sophisticated brand strategists in the British agricultural sector cannot now replicate regardless of budget. You cannot build what Diddley Squat built by wanting to build it. You can only build it by building something else honestly and visibly for long enough that people trust what comes out of it. That is not a celebrity brand. That is a vertically integrated trust machine. And nobody, not Carlsberg, not Tesco, not any of the people who watched the first series and found it charming, saw what it actually was until it was already worth £75 million. If you've enjoyed today's story, do subscribe and tap the notification bell, and take a look at the video on screen now, which we think you'll find equally compelling. Drop us a comment below. We genuinely like to know, have you tried Hawkstone? And when you did it taste different knowing where the barley was grown? Thank you, as always, for watching.